everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you so much for joining us today for our Tree Talks Digging Deeper Part 3. This is our final Lunch and Learn in this series. My name's Chelsea Wiseman, and I'm the Assistant Director of Alumni Engagement, focusing on Colorado and Southern Wyoming. We're so glad to have you here today. Before we jump in, I just want to take a moment and thank all of our attendees, many of whom are CSU Alumni Association members. Thank you so much for your membership. It makes a difference in our CSU community and allows us to have resources like these. A few general housekeepings for those of you that are tuning in for the first time. We will have time for questions, so feel free to put those in the comment section. You will need a YouTube account for that, so you can log into YouTube, or you can do that via a Gmail account. You can also ask questions by emailing me. My email is listed below, and I'll make sure to pass those along to Cami. Now, I want to be able to introduce Cami Long. If you've been following our series, you will already know, but Cami works for the Colorado State Forestry Service at the Grand Junction Field Office and is the Urban and Community Forestry Program Specialist and our resident tree guide here. If you've missed part 1 or part 2 of this series or our tree series from last year, you can find those on our YouTube page. All right, Cami, I'll hand it over to you. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks, Chelsea. Appreciate it. I'm coming to you from Gunnison, Colorado today instead of my normal location in Grand Junction. I've been inventorying trees at the Gunnison Cemetery and got to see a baby great horned owl and one of its parents yesterday. And there's been a red hawk flying around looking for a mate, I think. So it's been a great time here in Gunnison. So I got to step away to come and give this presentation to you all. Thank you so much for joining. So we're going to go into some common insects and diseases that are found in Colorado landscapes. I tried to make this specific enough that these are things that you would likely see, but also broad enough that it's covering the whole state. So first, the question would be like, who can help? Like, this presentation is great, but I need some more help. These are going to be the best options for you. The local CSU Extension office. There's extension offices in most counties around the state, or serve most counties around the state. And so if you just do your search in your search engine for CSU Extension, it'll bring up their main website. If you're looking for specifically the county offices, it's a kind of a long email or website address there, but that's the website that will take you to their list of county offices. And if you contact them, a lot of their master gardeners, they have a master gardener desk, can answer questions. You can email them with pictures or stop by the office and bring samples in. If you give them a call, they can help you out. Their website also has an insect and disease, or an insect and pest page, which is what this screenshot here is. And so you can go to their website to look for information on their website as well. So the other option is contacting a certified arborist. So that's a tree care company or an individual in your community that is a certified arborist. They are certified by the International Society of Arboriculture. And if you go to isa-arbor.com, you can click on this button that says Find an Arborist, and you can type in your zip code. And then you can find an arborist, the certified arborist near you. It doesn't give you necessarily businesses, it gives you individuals, but it should list who that arborist works for. The other one would be contacting your local municipality. They may have a forestry, a parks, an open space, or a public works department, depending on how your municipality is staffed and what departments they have, but they may be able to help identify a pest that you're dealing with, but they also may have a list of certified arborists or professionals for your area. So you don't have to look at this big list, maybe at the ISA website. So contact them because they may have a list that you can start from. So that's who I would reach out to for pest questions. You will notice that I didn't put myself on this list, and that's because I cover Western Colorado and it's a very large area. So I try not to get into the nitty-gritty of individual pest issues. there's a lot more people who are on the ground closer to you that can help. So let's get into it. So this is kind of species issues. So a lot of our maples will get chlorosis. It's called iron chlorosis, but it also happens in other trees like aspens and ash. And this is when the tree is unable to access the iron that's in the soil. And so there could be iron in the soil, but the tree, it's not in a form that the tree can access through its roots. And so the treatment has to be annual, and you're either putting iron sulfate or iron chelates or chelated iron down in the soil, like spreading it on the ground and mixed on the soil surface and watering it in, and it will get into the soil, and it's in a form that the tree can access. And so you can buy these at your local co-op or hardware store. But if you type in iron chlorosis or chelated iron, it will give you some more information. But this is when there's just an incompatibility between the tree root system and the soil that the tree is in. It's not something that's, I don't know, easily fixable. You have to put down chelated iron annually in order to keep those leaves green. The other one is excessive root suckering. Now, this isn't a pest or disease issue, but it is just a nuisance that I wanted to point out. If you have a tree that's continually suckering, that's roots or growths are coming from the root system, that's because the tree was likely grafted. And we talked about this last year in the planting presentation, where the root system is grafted to the above ground, the canopy portion, because of desired traits. And so sometimes when your root system is really vigorous, it can start putting up sprouts or suckers, and treatment can be removing them. You want to remove them down to the point of origin. You don't want to stub them at soil line because it starts to get ugly and creates like a woody berm around the tree. So you want to dig down and find where they're connected point of origin. You can spray the suckers with a plant hormone to reduce the suckering. There's two different ones out there. One is called Sucker Punch and one is called Sucker Stopper. You can search for these online. A lot of your local co-ops may carry them. And worst comes to worst, you can just replace the tree with a species or variety that is less prone to suckering. In my opinion, if a tree isn't working for you, you should just replace it and put a tree that will work and meet your goals, landscape goals. Fighting a tree is no fun, and you should be enjoying it, not fighting against its own nature. So let's go into pest issues. We call pests biotic because they're living. We have another set that, if we have time, we'll talk about called abiotic, and that's issues that can affect the tree that aren't living, namely us and what we do to the trees. So for biotic or pests, we're looking at insects, we're looking at pathogens or diseases, and then other organisms like mites, nematodes, and other animals. So for insects, the insect damage on trees is one of two ways. The damage is done by one of two ways. One is the feeding activity, where the damage is characterized by the mouth part, strangely enough, of the insect. And so if it's chewing, like caterpillars, wedworms, sawflies, larvae, beetles, and weevils, where they're chewing on the tree and their chewing causes the damage that we see, that's the feeding activity. The other kind is called piercing or sucking mouth parts. Aphids, scale, leafhoppers, psyllids, adelgids, and true bugs have the piercing, sucking mouth parts. And so when they are feeding on the tree, that causes damage that we see. The other type of damage is by egg laying activity. And so the damage occurs when the insect lays their eggs on the plant. So cicadas, bark beetles, some wasps, those are examples of damage caused by egg laying activity. So if you're anywhere near the Front Range and you're seeing all the ponderosa pine starting to turn brown and die, it's bark beetles that are laying eggs underneath the bark that's causing those trees to die. So that's an example of egg laying activity causing severe damage, even death to the tree. So for chewing insects, they eat the plant parts, either partially or entirely. They may eat flowers, leaves, buds, and or the wood. Some of the chewing insects will tunnel beneath the bark to lay the eggs. So like the bark beetles are a chewing insect. They chew through the bark to get to the cambial layer underneath the bark. And then they lay the eggs, which causes the damage there. So that's kind of a twofold for some insects, where they chew and they lay eggs, and both those cause damage. For the tunneling insects, the larvae under the bark create their own tunnels as they get larger and mature. And those tunnels, they're eating the vascular system, the xylem and the phloem of the plant, which is where the nutrients are. And so as they tunnel underneath the bark, they're cutting into the vascular system, preventing the tree from moving water nutrients up and down the stem. And that's what kills those trees. So that's the damage the larva causes. Some insects will bore into the actual wood of the tree, and those create structural damage. While, for example, the bark beetles don't bore into the wood, and so you can still use that wood structurally for building houses and furniture, while an insect that is tunneling into the actual wood of the tree creates structural instability, and so therefore that wood isn't usable except really for firewood. So symptoms of chewing insects, you'll see damage to the leaves, like skeletonizing, where they're just kind of leaving the lines in between the leaves left. Leaf mining, those guys get in between the actual layers of the leaf, and you'll see little mine trails in between the leaf layers. They might eat the margin. And honestly, I say eating, but leaf cutting bees cut out the edges of the leaves, making strange shaped holes in the leaves, but they're using that for nesting for their larvae, for their babies. So it's not only eating, but it's using the tree parts for their reproduction. For borers and beetles, the signs and symptoms you'll see, are crown thinning, crown wilting, chlorosis of the leaves, that's the yellowing, and then death of twigs and branches. You might also see the small emergence holes as the adults emerge. So on the right is a picture of an emerald ash borer, and the tunnel it's next to is what that's an adult. So it had just pupated from a larva into an adult, but those galleries, those kind of snake serpentine galleries next to it, is what causes the significant damage. Then you see the crown thinning and wilting. And then the picture on the left is the ash bark beetle. And these are a really tiny bark beetle that attacks ash as well. And these are their galleries underneath the bark, which can be an indicator to people when looking at the galleries as what kind of insect it is. Galleries are often very specific to a bark beetle or a wood-boring insect, and can help identify. Piercing and sucking insects, the symptoms you'll see is stippling, where like it's dots of yellow amongst the green, distortion of the plant, where the leaves react to being pierced and sucked and kind of curl in on themselves. That's the picture on the far right. They can create galls, which is that top picture, where the tree kind of creates either some kind of, the tree reacts to the egg laying activity as well as the piercing sucking insect by creating a growth around the damage. Chlorosis is that yellowing of the leaves. Dieback is when the branches are dying back, leaf drop, and just general drooping. So those can be symptoms of piercing sucking insects. So getting into specific insect information, scale is what we see a lot around the landscape in Colorado. This is an insect that is a piercing sucking insect. There's two different kinds. We have hard scale and soft scale, and they're related to mealybugs, aphids, and whiteflies. And the scale has a protective covering that hides and protects the body. So you can't just spray something on the plant to kill scale because they're protected by their body parts. So some people are familiar with something called honeydew. And so if a tree has soft scale or aphids in it, often you'll have honeydew dripping out of the tree. It kind of looks like rain, but it's sticky. And honeydew is actually the excrement or the poop of soft scales and aphids. So these insects are accessing the sap from the tree. They're ingesting what they need, and then they release out the honeydew, which is sap that's been processed by the insect. So it's still sticky, and that's why it sticks to your car. But it is an indicator that there's an insect in your tree if you're seeing honeydew on the sidewalks or on your cars or on other plants. But we call it honeydew because it sounds less worse. Armored scales they're still piercing, sucking, but they're often feeding on the cell contents instead of the sap. And these are a little tougher to deal with because they're called armored scale because they have a much tougher exoskeleton, so to speak, it's not a skeleton, but they have a harder covering their bodies to protect them. So it's a little more difficult to manage them. Some examples of soft scale, that the one we mostly see is European elm scale, and that's all these little white fringes. I'm sorry, my computer's being a little weird with the mouse, but the mouse is on a scale right here. So that white edge is one individual scale. So each white circle you see on here, and they kind of bunch up sometimes, but each individual white rimmed insect is a scale. And they're really quite prominent on elms. This is an elm as well. And so you can kind of see that on those leaves, they're a little shiny, and that's the honeydew. And then the bark of the tree itself is black, because when the honeydew lands on the bark of elm trees, sometimes they get something called sooty bark mold, which turns the bark black because a mold is growing on the honeydew that's falling on the plant. So it's a great way to identify elms with scale. Armored scale, we see a lot. Oyster shell is a prevalent one on aspen, and pine needle scale is prevalent on pine trees. And so these are some close-ups of the armored scale, which you can see looks a little bit different than the soft scale, but they are still that piercing, sucking insect. So to manage them, it includes proper plant care. So a stressed tree is more susceptible to insect activity and attacks. You want to protect your beneficial insects like ladybugs and other insects that eat other insects. You can use a horticulture oil, but you have to time it very specifically during their dormant stage, or when there's a stage called the crawler stage. So when the mama scale lays eggs, when they hatch, those young are called crawlers. And so they're crawling to the different parts of the plants. Once they settle, then they'll create that shell that will protect them. And so when they're in that crawler stage, they're susceptible to being impacted by the horticulture oil, which smothers them. And so you have to time that really specifically, so that, because if you spray the tree with the horticulture oil after they've already crawled and created that protective shell, it won't impact them. And then some scale is susceptible to systemic insecticides. And so that's when you're doing like a soil drench around the tree, and then the tree uptakes that chemical. And since those insects are feeding on the plant's sap, those chemicals are now in the plant system. And so they're sucking in that chemical. And what's nice about that is you're not having to spray anything in the landscape. You're putting it directly into the soil for the tree to take in. And so if you have scale, you want to determine what your host is, what the plant is, because that's a really good indicator of what insect it is if it's a scale. And then you can determine what the treatment is based on what scale it is. Aphids are another really common insect we see. They have the piercing sucking insects. They're very tiny. This picture on the bottom right is obviously very much blown up. There are so many different kinds of aphids that have been identified, over 4,000. So it says it's impossible to generalize, but I'm going to attempt that. They are very common in the spring. They really like tender new growth of the outdoor plants. A female can produce young at the rate of 3 to 6 per day, and for several weeks, so the populations can really grow exponentially within a week or so. And you're just like, wait, I just saw a few, and now I see all of these aphids on my tree. And so they're piercing and sucking, so they're sucking the sap in that tree, which can impact their health, and it can also create distortion. So this weird picture of the leaves in the upper photo is an ash tree that has a ash leaf curl aphid. We're really good with naming things. So ash leaf curl aphid, you can see the leaves are curling, which makes it tough to manage them because they're protected by those leaves that are curled. So you can't just spray them down with a hose because the leaves are protecting them. The life cycle of an aphid is really fascinating. So if you want to get lost in the world of aphids, I highly recommend you doing some research on them. So for management, for the most part, if they're not in high numbers, you can just take a hose with a really forceful stream and just spray them off. They're soft-bodied insects, so it's very easy to kill them with and spray them off. If you do add nitrogen to your landscape, you want to use something that's slow release, so you don't have a lot of fresh new growth that those aphids are taking advantage of. You can use insecticidal soap, but you want to be really careful with that. So soaps will dry an insect out, desiccate them, but it will impact your beneficial insects. So you want to be really careful when using insecticidal soap. You can also use oils, refined horticulture oils on aphids, and you can also encourage those beneficial insects. So again, find out what your plant host is, and then you can figure out which aphid you have and if you need to manage it or not. Most landscapes have some level of aphids in them. It's just a matter as if it's causing significant damage to the plant, if you need to manage them or not. Lilac ash borer is really common insect attacking our ash trees. So this is not the ash bark beetle, which is common in Grand Junction, which is a tiny bark beetle, but it's also not the emerald ash borer, which is the one that's getting a lot of attention because that's a non-native invasive insect that's just decimating our ash. This lilac ash borer is actually a clearwing moth that mimics wasps for protection, and it's native, but they do attack trees that are in suboptimal locations or trees that are really stressed. So the first step against treating lilac ash borer is to make sure your tree is healthy, it's getting enough water, it was planted correctly, there's no root issues, but a lot of it comes down to water. So that's the prevention, is making sure your tree is happy. This, if you can see it, when the lilac ash borer emerges from the tree, it kind of pupates once it emerges. And so this is the exoskeleton of the ash borer as it's left the tree. And so if you have a tree that's been attacked, sometimes you'll see these leftover exoskeletons poking out from the bark of your ash tree. So sprays won't control a borer that's already inside the tree. That's the same for bark beetles. Once a borer is inside the tree, it's not susceptible to chemicals. So you have to treat them before, you have to treat these guys by spraying the trunk with egg hatch, so that when the eggs are hatching, they are then being impacted by that chemical that has been sprayed onto the tree. And so working with a company who's going to spray the tree, and they're paying attention to emergence of adults, because then those eggs hatch will be within 10 to 14 days of the adult emergence. And that's when you would be treating your trees. Tree diseases, most diseases, and as I've mentioned, insects are very host specific. So you need to know what you have, what tree you have, to know how to treat it. So we have vascular diseases, we have foliar diseases, and you really need to know the amount, the intensity of the infection will depend on your host resistance, the vitality, how aggressive the pathogen is, and environmental conditions. So this tree on the bottom right is a American sycamore, which is very susceptible to anthracnose. But London plane trees, which look almost exactly the same, are more resistant to anthracnose. So in Grand Junction, we've stopped planting American sycamores, and we now plant London plane trees because we get anthracnose in Grand Junction. And that's a bacterium that creates these witches' brooms on the edge of branches and causes branch death. What we see a lot in town and trees is something called bacterial wetwood. It's a bacterial disease found in cottonwoods, elms, mulberries, aspens, and it's an ooze that's the result of an internal anaerobic respiration, and it pushes this ooze, this stinky, gross ooze through cracks and wounds and pruning cuts. And it's inside the tree. But the thing is about it, it's super ugly and it stinks, but it doesn't cause any health issues. I had some relatives that moved a tree that had bacterial wetwood because their dog kept licking it. I get that, but it doesn't harm the tree, which is great. It's always nice when something doesn't actually harm the tree. Sometimes you'll hear it called slime flux or alcohol flux. People used to put like taps in the tree to help get the ooze out. You don't need to do that. Just leave it alone. Don't worry about it. Don't let it bother you. Look the other way. It's not a big deal. Happy to say. Fire blight is a bacterial disease found on crab apples, mountain ash, and pears. It can kill trees under certain conditions. My mother-in-law had a pear tree that got fire blight, and it's really difficult to manage, especially in younger trees that get fire blight, because of the amount of pruning you have to do to try to remove the diseased wood. So eventually we just removed the tree and replaced it with a pear that was more resistant to fire blight, and the tree is doing great, never has had it again. I have shown a picture of the planting I did of that pear tree with my cat in it, if you remember that picture. So fire blight is really tough to manage. It's more prevalent in moist, wet springs, and it's just really hard to prune out. So if you know you have fire blight in your area and you're choosing a tree to plant, choose a more fire blight resistant variety. Most crab apples will say their resistance to fire blight in their information. If you are going to prune a tree with fire blight, you need to make sure you're cleaning your pruning shears between cuts to prevent the spread of the bacteria between cuts. But it also can be spread by insects and raindrops. So good luck. I know I'm running out of time, but Cytospora is another disease that impacts many, many different species. And it's hard to manage. If it's in branches, you can prune the branches out. If it's in the stem, like this photo, you can't prune that out. And it spreads really easily by spores. And so the best thing you can do is keep your tree healthy. And if it's severely infested, or infected by the canker, then it's best to just remove the tree and plant something else, hopefully something that's not susceptible to Cytospora. So it can also be in spruce. So we're just going to finish with talking about integrated pest management. And this is a systematic approach to pest management that utilizes a variety of control techniques, starting with monitoring, keeping an eye on your plants, on your landscape to see if there's any insect or diseases that are affecting them. And then you're choosing from three goals. You're preventing it, you're eradicating it, and you're suppressing it. Eradication can be really difficult with certain pests, and it might not be possible. But the objective of integrated pest management is keeping your pest population to low or levels that don't cause significant damage to the plant. The most important part is to keep your trees healthy, and that's proper pruning, proper watering, and of course, starting with proper planting. All right, that's what I have for you. Did we have any questions that popped up, Chelsea?
Oh, this was so great. Thank you so much. The only one was about Japanese pine beetles.
So Japanese beetles, they are a non-native. The problem, the great joy about Japanese beetles is that they are rather indiscriminate in what they will attack and feed on. So like what I said, most insects and diseases are more host specific. They if it's a mountain pine beetle, they go after pine trees. If it's an ash bark beetle, they go after ash trees. The Japanese beetle will feed on a very wide variety of plants. So there's no real the treatment for the Japanese beetle is in their grub stage. They overwinter in your lawn, in your irrigated lawn. And so you try to manage the population by treating your lawn. There's a chemical called like GrubX that you put on your lawn to kill the grubs in the soil before they become adults. The problem is, especially depending where you're at, like in the Front Range, they're kind of like everywhere. And so you can treat your lawn, but if your neighbors aren't treating theirs, then those Japanese beetles are going to come over. And so you can, pick them off and put them in a bucket of soapy water to kill them. They're just very hard to manage. The best thing you can do is do the GrubX to reduce populations and get your neighbors to do it as well.
That's great. Well, I certainly will be talking to my neighbors next year about that.
Yes.
A great recommendation. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Cami. This has been fabulous. I learned so much about all the kinds I didn't know there were 2 different kinds of scale bugs. So
yes, there's so much out there. The insect world is a fascinating place that you can definitely lose some hours as you research them.
Yes, I feel like that with all the information you give me. Well, this is perfect. Thank you so much. I really appreciate your time. Thank you for those that joined us. This has been great.
Thank you.
Bye.